Welcome to the Bug Hunters Café. Have a seat anywhere.
Hello Marta, hi Jason. Whoa, full house. What's with all the sheep today?
The cafe brushed up against the sheepiverse.
The what now?
The sheepiverse. It's a thing. It's a universe occupied entirely by sheep, apparently. Oh no, sorry. We need this third chair. I think there's one over there though. No problem. How do you too?
When did you learn to speak sheep?
A long time ago. It's sure coming in handy today. I'm fluent in chicken too.
I just hope our guest today doesn't mind sheep.
I should think not. Actually, based on his profile photos, I think JeanHeyd is a sheep.
JeanHeyd Meneide? I've seen his name on some C standard papers.
That's him. He's a project editor for the C Language International Standardization Working Group and part of a software consultancy, Shepherd's Oasis LLC.
Talented sheep. But how are we gonna recognize him when he comes in?
Well, with any luck, he'll recognize my bow tie.
Hi, is that Jason Boyan?
Yeah.
Hello.
Hey,
Oh.
so you are human. You are in human form right now.
Well, mostly. If I take off my hood, you can see I got the ears and everything. It's weird being in the sheepiverse, but it's mostly nice.
So would you be classified a were-sheep or just?
I think it's because right now I'm just a mix, and I can't really transform. I don't think I'm aware. I don't. Yeah, whatever. Yeah, I'm not like a werewolf. I can't turn into a full sheep. I think it would be cool though, but it hasn't happened yet. I don't know if I need to be like bit by a sheep, but I don't know if I want to be bit by one.
Well, there's a cranky one in the corner if you change your mind, but.
Oh, okay. And you gotta save me a seat.
Yeah.
Yep, we did.
Awesome.
It's good to see you here. Hey, so can I get you anything to drink? The coffee's on Soft Terrific. They're the ones that pay for these chats.
Yeah, actually, no. I should probably not have coffee because I actually slept pretty well, and if I drink a bunch of coffee, I'm gonna definitely overshoot and then exhaust myself, and then I definitely won't be able to catch the interdimensional ride home, and that'll be a bit of a shame.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think they've got some non-calf options too. Like I think they have some Timothy Hayes smoothies today. They're really in high demand right now.
Ooh, I might take a smoothie then, maybe with a little banana or something.
All right, cool. With or without hay?
No, see, I want to say without hay, but the craving is there, and I think it's because I keep rushing to the Sheeverse like this. But what the hay? What the hay? I'll try some hay.
I'll get that. I'll get your usual bouillon without hay.
Excellent. So, Jean, tell me, what's your favorite book?
My favorite book. When I was a kid, I mean, there's a bunch of intellectual books I should probably say here, but I'm going to say the trashy answer. When I was a kid or a teenager, I don't know. Basically, I read a lot of fantasy books. Not like the young adults fantasy books, but the actual fantasy books, the ones that were I don't know, based on D&D campaigns and all the other weird stuff. I never played D&D, but it was still fun. And throughout all those books, I eventually found one on this series called Rhapsody. And I love that book a lot. I think it was one of the most favorite because I think it was such an interesting world and had all these interesting implications, and it had this weird time loop that was in it. And so yeah, I'm not going to summarize the whole plot here, but basically I had a lot of fun reading it. And it's one of the things I think that really helped kind of keep my creativity going for a very long time. And even after I've kind of fell out of favor of binge reading books, and instead replaced with doing programming and standardization work, I always still remember those books, and I think they were the most. They're still, to this day, they're still my favorite. Yeah.
Can you repeat the name, because I'm a big sucker for any time-related stuff.
Yeah. So the whole book series is called Rhapsody. And oh my god, I can't. The author's name was in my head when I was talking about it 10 seconds ago, but the minute I was oh yeah, I should say the author name, it just disappeared out of my head. Oh no. But yeah, the whole series is called Rhapsody. It's got 5 or 6 books in it. I also remember, I think one of the key things about it is that, and this is a small detail, but the author actually put time into like specifying the actually writing out like the way people would talk with like certain accents and things, so you could actually get like a feel for the characters as they wrote the dialogue. But yeah, there's a bunch of fun stuff about it, and if the moment I remember the author name, I'm gonna like scream it out in the middle or something. So if a random name just pops out of me, and
Well, I believe I
JeanHeyd,
can help you out. Here's your banana Timothy Hayes smoothie, and Boyan, here is your usual. And the name you're looking for would be Elizabeth Hayden,
Elizabeth Hayden.
Haydon.
Yes. That was exactly the book. I think her first book was like Child of Blood or something. But yeah, it sounds a little bit spooky when you say Child of Blood, but no, it's the whole book series Rhapsody. It's a very nice series. I certainly enjoyed the story arc and everything else.
Child of Blood, probably more popular a title than something like, say, Cousin of Lymph. Just saying.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, being like the nephew of Bones or something might be a little bit cooler, but
Ooh, I like that. Now you need to write a book.
yeah.
Oh, I like that. So you went from reading fantasy, I was overhearing, to you wound up getting into programming, and then you wound up on the standards board. How did you wind up on the standards board? Because I know there's a lot of people that probably think, oh, that would be so cool to help make decisions. How did you wind up there?
Well, I think first, if anyone says they want to help make decisions, I think they might want to reevaluate some of their decisions if they learn what's in the committee. Um, but it was kind of an accident, or I guess a happenstance of circumstances. So first I went to this conference. What was it called? C++ Now on Earth. I went to the conference called C++ Now, and um, while I was there, I gave a presentation about some of the C++ stuff I was doing, whatever, right? Some programming thing. And while I was there, some people started mentioning this thing called the Standards Committee, and I learned that there was, in fact, that the C++ standard wasn't just some like magical document produced from the ether and blessed down to us mortals or something. That it was actually written by people, and that these people met in places, and that they were real, human beings, right? Mostly I don't think any of them had they didn't have sheep ears and stuff like that, but they were mostly human beings. And they they said while I was at the conference that I could go there and I could propose stuff and influence decisions. And I was like, well, why the hell not, right? So I tell myself, all right, I'm going to go there. I'm going to start contributing and making changes and proposing stuff. And so I started doing that, which is a bit of a weird stretch to do that. But I did that, I think, a couple of years ago, and it kind of kept snowballing. I mean, I kept finding more and more things I wanted to fix. So I was like, okay, I need to fix these things really badly, right? Because there's people out there depending on this being not garbage. um, so I start doing that, and I just get more and more involved, and then I figure out that not only is there this one committee, there's not just one committee, but there's like at least like 32 different committees doing all sorts of stuff. There's committees that handle Unicode. There's committees that handle different programming languages. Like, so even Fortran, which I thought was like kind of like an old dead language, is in fact like a real committee that is currently in session, that is like making changes and updating things to Fortran.
Oh yeah, COBOL is too, by the way. Neither one has ever stopped continual development.
Yeah, that's what I found surprising, right? Because you only hear about COBOL like when when they talk about like mainframes and all this other stuff that powers the galaxy of credit and all of that stuff. But yeah, apparently they've never really died or stopped. And so as I became more aware, I realized that there were other committees, including one for the C standard, right? So there's a C++ committee, and they do stuff for the C++ language, and there's a C committee, and they do stuff for the C language. And so I was having some problems in C++, not with the committee, but with the language itself and with the library, because there were some fundamental problems that C++ inherited from C, right? And so I said, well, if I'm going to really fix this, I can't just do something in C++. This is something I have to fix at the C level. So I just kind of, tumbled on over and into the C committee and started writing a couple papers. And then at the time, the editor was retiring. So both the primary editor and the backup editor both effectively retired at that point. And so there was a very awkward moment where we didn't, where like, so what the editor does is that they take all of the documents that exist in the universe and they compile them together and they make the necessary changes to the standard, and then they actually ship the standard every 5, 7, whatever years, right? I think the next one that the C committee is going to do is C23. So that person was gone for a while, and so people were attending these meetings and they were making changes to the document, but nobody was compiling any of those changes. So we just kind of ended up in this weird limbo where like a bunch of changes were stacking up, and nobody was integrating them into what's called the working draft, into like the actual real document. And this is one of those things. I didn't get nerd sniped per se, but I have this thing where I have a really hard problem like watching things not go over nicely, basically. So like I was watching the committee kind of just like approve papers, but like nothing move into the actual document, like the actual working draft that governs the actual changes that will eventually be published to C23, because we didn't have an editor, a person who was supposed to aggregate all these documents and put them together. And so eventually somebody reached out to me and said, hey, maybe you should be the C project editor person. And I was like, I don't know if that's a good idea. I have a lot on my plate, but it would be nice to fix this stuff. But I have other things to do, but it would be nice to put these documents together. But I'm really busy and I can't do that stuff. But it would be nice to be able to help the C committee. And so it's just back and forth. Eventually what actually happened is that there's an application process. So I think, what was it, last June or something, I sent in an email and I was like, yeah, just put my name in the pool, see what happens. And then like less than a day later, it was like, congratulations, you're now the C product editor. And I was like, oh, okay, awesome. I am definitely super qualified to do this and ready to take the job. Oh boy. It turns out the only thing you need to be the editor is a love-hate relationship with the LaTeX programming language, because apparently that's what the standard is built out of. So I am now furthering my love-hate relationship with LaTeX and building out this.
You mean it's not pronounced latex?
I wish it was pronounced latex, but no, it's just pronounced LaTeX, and people get really nerdy about it. But I should probably start pronouncing it latex, just to get on some people's nerves.
Well, it's like, I guess it's like GIFs instead of GIFs, and the fact that it's called sequel instead of squirrel. I'm sorry, I call it squirrel. I don't care what it's supposed to be. It's squirrel. It'll always be squirrel.
Squirrel is definitely a lot cuter than what I imagine most SQL looks.
So you mentioned that you were driven to the C committee from working with the C++ committee, submitting papers because of a bug. Was that in any chance? I first discovered you thanks to a very interesting illustrated article you had, where you were dealing with a bug or something weird, and it was illustrated. It was illustrated comic book style, with you trying to find a unicorn and finding a zombie instead. And yes. What I love that, by the way. I've shared that with more people than I can count. Anyway, was that the bug that drove you over there?
No. So that wasn't the bug that drove me over there. But yes, I do remember that article. It's actually one of my favorite articles. I have more art. I'm going to be writing more articles with more art and stuff that from soon. But I got to kick myself into gear to write those articles. I've got Yes, that article was about a bug. It was actually one of the most difficult bugs I think that I had. Right? Well, not the most difficult, but it definitely ranked up there. And that bug didn't propel me to join the C committee, but it did propel me to join the C++ one, because one of the first papers I wrote was to fix specifically that problem that I faced and that bug that I faced in that article. So I wanted to like fix that bug really badly, and so that's why it brought me to the C committee, and then that's what kind of spawned out that whole article where I went looking for this implementation and deployment experience, and instead I found this rotting husk of an idea that never got implemented and whatever else. So that's where the zombie art comes from and everything else. And I think the artist was What's This What's That. She's on Twitter. She's in a bunch of places. She does a lot of horror art and stuff. And it's actually very spooky, but also like it's horrifying. But at the same time, you can't look away, so you look anyway, and it hurts. But it's great. It's creativity is weird.
I was there for the sheep. But
Yeah.
so tell me a little bit more about this bug. I mean, obviously, if anyone wants all the gory details, they can read the article. But in a nutshell, how did you what was this bug, and how did you wind up slamming into it in the first place? Anyway.
Yeah, so there's a couple different ways that I think I had this abstraction, right? It's called optional, right? And so the idea is this optional is that it either contains the thing or contains nothing, right? And you can check whether it contains the thing or contains nothing, right? And that's the very simple part. The interesting part is what happens when you stick a reference inside of this thing, right? So in C++, there's a concept of references. There's a concept of these things that they don't quite exist. They just refer to a thing that existed previous, that already exists somewhere else, right? So I was returning these reference things because I was basically returning um, a way for you to look at it, some information that was already in a data structure, right? And I didn't want to copy it out because I wanted you to have direct access to it and performance and blah, blah, blah. So I handed you this reference, and I handed you this optional reference, right? So if you search through the structure and you found it, I would turn you the data as a reference, right? So I wouldn't copy anything. And of course, I would wrap this in an optional. If you didn't find anything, I would turn you an optional, it'd be empty, and that was fine. So I used this thing. I used this optional thing. I kept using it and using it over and over again. But all of the data that was going in this data structure was very simple, right? And so anytime I did the lookup, anytime I tried to find the thing so that I could return this information to you, it was always just I'd hit find the first thing, and that'd be the thing that'd be the thing that I was looking for, and I just hand that back to you. What ended up happening is that I eventually got more complex data in the data structure, and so what happened was there was multiple hits for the right thing. And so what happened is I filled out this optional return type with the reference the first time, and then I would find the second thing that was a better match, and so I would write it over the first one, right? And that action of writing over the first one, there are two in theory there are two competing ways that you can handle that. One is to go through the reference that exists inside the option already and basically write directly into the data, or it's to basically swap out the reference for the other reference, right? So one of them is kind of a cheap operation where you just kind of say, oh, we're referring to this new thing now, right? It's kind of, if you know about pointers, it's basically like swapping pointers, right? Or if you use, say, like JavaScript, right? If you're pointing at one object, you can assign that thing to a new object, and it'll be pointing at that new object instead, right? So it's kind of like a different referral, basically, right? That's one option. The other option that I described before is basically like you pry open the object and you actually fill out and like scribble over the data, right? And then that scribbling over the data, that was the bug. That was the thing I was doing in my implementation of this optional thing. And the problem with that is that I never encountered that use case before because I always had these very simple data structures. And so the bug manifested where only in the specific case where I had this very complex data structure with this very complex data, very real world scenes and everything, did this bug manifest. And so I lost my mind, right? Because I didn't know it was the optional at the time. I thought it was everything else, right? I thought that this thing was wrong over here, that thing was wrong. So there were print statements everywhere. There was I had traces. I had at one point I used BooStack trace. I was going nuts. I checked everything. And then I finally, I had narrowed it down to one specific instance, and so I put a bunch of like breakpoints in the debugger to find exactly what was going wrong. And so I'm like tapping through this thing. I'm going, and it just dawns on me between this line and this line that the data in some completely different place suddenly changed, right? So I stopped the thing, I rolled it back, I ran the program again, I got to that exact same spot, and I put out a data printout of this data that was changing, and I saw that every time I went over this one line, this optional return equals some value, that I see the data all the way over there changing. And that's when I realized that I had this weird interpretation of what changing out the reference was. So I realized that I was assigning into this reference, and it was like scribbling over the data over here because that was what I was telling it to do, right? That's the way I had implemented the thing, this optional thing. And that was like the wrong interpretation, right? I didn't know at the time it was the wrong interpretation, right? This time I was a little bit younger in computer science. I wasn't on any committees or whatever else, right? I was just a young idiot. And so I kind of had this deep shame about it, because at the time there were other people who had implemented this optional thing. So I looked at their implementations, and everybody did the changing it, the referral, right? They swapped the pointers, right? They changed the referral, what the data was referring to, rather than actually scribbling over the data itself, right? And I was like, oh, I'm stupid, right? How could I possibly have come up with this interpretation? This is why you just use, the library that comes off the internet, Boost or whatever else, and you just do what they do, and you don't write your own stuff, right? You don't reinvent the wheel, right? So anyway, I learned a very painful lesson about A, reinventing the wheel, and B, not quite fully capturing the semantics and ideas of what I was doing. And so that was what the bug was. And I think that was one of the most painful bugs I've had more painful bugs related to the standard library and other stuff, but that was definitely one of the most painful bugs I've ever experienced. And the reason that article came to be was because I had realized that this experience I had of that being the absolute wrong decision was not in fact shared by other people, and that other people, despite never implementing it the way I had, the way that was the way that was bad, the mistaken way, still believed that was the right way to do things. And so that's kind of why I wrote this I wrote this very heartfelt and visceral article about this bug, because I had found people in the community who were advocating for a thing that had literally caused me, days and days and weeks of tearing through a code base to find what was wrong. And so that's why I wrote that write up. That's why I wrote the whole thing. But yeah, it was definitely interesting. Going through that bug, it was definitely interesting.
So that I have to mention because we do all have those young idiot bugs. I think mine was an infinite loop I caused myself because I forgot a semicolon. I spent 2 weeks trying to find why my dumber bug, just to make it feel a little better. I thought, what? I think, I have this data here and I'm creating this hash off this data to make sure it's not tampered with. But what happens if I thought, oh, wouldn't it be nice to be able to recover the data for this big, large 2,000 line file off of the hash? And it did not occur to me that SHA-256 is a one-way hash.
Oh.
And so I wrote this whole code to try and reverse engineer on my little refurbished laptop from the hash. And it was about 2 hours into running through that I realized that there was a problem because it was taking forever. And I was like, I wonder how long this is going to take based on, because I had written in such a way that I could see its progress. And so I started doing some calculations, and I figured out that from that moment, if I just left it running and the computer was continually powered, that at that rate, it would finish on June 23rd, 29:58 at 5:32 a.m. At which point I figured out that this was not a viable option. This was not going to work for recovering data. So it's like, yeah, no. It was, and then it was about 6 months after that I went, oh, that's why it's called a one-way hash. Okay, now I know. I mean, if you're not embarrassed by the code you wrote 6 months ago, a year ago, whatever, then you're doing it wrong.
Yeah, definitely.
Is this then where the screen name "The Phantom Storm" came from? Kind of this snarky, self-deprecating sort of.
No. So it was actually still self-deprecating, but it's actually a different kind of self-deprecation. A different kind of self-deprecation. Don't worry. I had the nickname the PhD for a very little while, but what really happened is that I was very terrible at video games, right? Because before I used to actually play a lot of different video games, but I don't anymore. I should, but I haven't. But basically, I was really terrible at video games, and I played with friends at the time, so they know I was terrible at video games, right? I'm basically the reason we lost a lot of games and a bunch of other stuff. So they started calling me Dirt, right? Because I'd make like very like silly mistakes while we were playing these games, right? I mean, I was having fun, but they were silly mistakes. So they started calling me Dirt, and then what happened is eventually, like, I built out the PhD. I took that name and I kind of built it out to fit this idea that that I was in fact a derp. So I was like, so I needed something for which I just left as the. I needed something for the PH for the PhD. So I was like, Phantom, right? So I was like the Phantom and then derp. And then sometimes they said derp or derp store, so I just spelled out the full thing, so it's the Phantom Derp store, right? And that's actually what the PhD means. A lot of people who don't know that backstory, so they think I'm just being like cocky or like that I like I have a degree and everything. I don't have a degree, but I don't have like a doctorate or anything like that. But yeah, so a lot of people thought I was just being cocky, but no, it's actually it's a self-deprecating joke. I hope that one day it does mean I have a doctorate, but it's not right now.
Oh boy! No, I hear what you mean about things taking on new meaning. I've had mouse in my screen name forever, and that is a reference to a character I created in a prank war when I was 12.
Wow!
And it was the code I added when I started programming. I'm known ubiquitously as CodeMouse92, but the mouse part was from a practical joke war that I won, but I decided to basically I wound up in a practical joke war with a bunch of college students on IRC when I was 12, and because I was an op actually in my mother's writing community, so I helped manage the IRC room. They did not know this, and they just knew I was in there. They didn't know I was also an op, but I which can be really helpful in a practical joke war. But anyway, so I use Microsoft Home Publishing. This is how I got into coding. I used Microsoft Home Publishing 2000 to make, because they allowed you back then to make e-cards, interactive e-cards that only ran on Internet Explorer, but it was kind of cool. You could click on things and whatever and have different things happen. And I didn't realize I was coding, but it was all conditional logic without even realizing it. It was just like no code type conditional logic. And I built these games. I wound up building these web games called Remy and the Lab Rats, because I was joking that they were all lab rats in a social experiment. And anyway, I was the title or villain. Blue Boy was the screen name I had used to prank them with. And anyway, so by about game 3, I realized, you know what? I don't like being the villain forever. This villainous character has become too evil for me to continue using him as a persona. So I decided to put myself in the game as one of the lab rats. So I became Luke D. Mouse. And that was, for years, it was known as Luke D. Mouse around the internet. And incidentally, Luke is not a mouse. He's a rat. He uses mouse because he doesn't want species discrimination. But RAT wound up getting an acronym of Really Annoying Twerp. Or Radically Awesome Teen is the other one that was used on me sometimes. And now it's just Radically Awesome Twerp. That's kind of what it's mutated to. Someone else said Reality Altering Technician. It keeps gaining more meanings.
Yeah.
But that's so CodeMouse92 is a reference to that, and then to my family, I'm just known as Rat. So, that's so I hear you about sometimes these screen names are weird, aren't they? Bojan, do you have any weird screen names, or are you just known as Bojan?
I have a bunch of screen names that are super weird. I mean,
do you have any that are not top secret for legal reasons?
No, because I made them when I was 16. And they were super edgy. So I'm deeply ashamed of them.
Oh man.
So
I'm trying to think if I made any super edgy screen names and stuff. I think I wrote some super edgy stories, but I don't think I have any super edgy screen names. Which I'm glad those stories are buried and gone. They're completely lost to time, and I'm so glad they are. My kids will never find them. Like, you know, my nephews and cousins will never be able to find. Like, hey, did you write this? And, like, me have a panic attack in front of them, like they found it.
and then you remember that one floppy disk that you forgot about.
Oh no, not the floppy
But they will
disk.
not know how to use it.
No, that's true. And
They won't
no,
know. There'll be no technology left to open a floppy disk. It'll basically be like secret knowledge. They have to like hike across like the country and or hike across the universe to find the one person, the person who keeps all the antiques, right? They have to blow off the dust of a floppy drive and figure out.
that feels like it needs to be a fantasy story.
Yeah.
You know, like set in the future, a dystopian future, and somebody finds the solution to this. You know, the cure for this virus was known, but it's stored on a floppy disk from like 250 years ago that's been kept in, you know, secure archival storage. But we don't know how to read this thing and have it to go on this long crazy quest.
Okay, that would
Yeah.
actually be pretty cool. Yeah, you could be like, you know, they well, hold on. So first, you have to get it, like, you have to make it spicy. So like the galactic government has a conspiracy, right? And so they believe that they're holding on to this floppy disk that has the secret of curing this disease, right? So they have to break in, right? This is like Nicolas Cage. They have to break in into this government facility, right? Grab the floppy disk, and then they have to, like, before the government catches up to them, they have to find the magical person who's capable of decrypting the floppy disk before the government does. And that actually makes for a pretty fun story.
And then they decrypt it and find out it's just a bunch of terrible fan fiction.
But then they learn that laughter is the cure for everything.
Yes. And there's a song about believe in yourself, and you know.
No. Maybe the real treasure was the one we made along the way.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
there we go. Something like that. Something
Yeah,
like
exactly.
that. Oh my gosh.
Bug Hunters Café. This is Marta. Our hours? We're open 24/7 at bughunters.cafe. You can also find us on Twitter, Dev, and Instagram as Bug Hunters Cafe. You're allergic to what now? Wool. Well, then today might not be the best day to visit. We seem to have an abundance of wool here today. I understand. We'll be here. You're out of creamer again? Okay, I'll have to get more from the bag. Sugar too? Anything else? Hey, you're not supposed to eat the napkins. I didn't even think sheep ate stuff like that. Oh, the goat ate it. Well, I can bring more, but if he's going to keep eating them, I'll have to add a surcharge.
I have a question. Since most ordinary humans hate meetings, why do you love them? Why have you joined so many committees? And why do you love hurting yourself?
Well, so I think that I'm not sure yet, but I definitely think I'm a masochist. I definitely think I'm a masochist, but I part of it is that I realize that it's sort of like an impetus, right? Like, if I don't do it, who is going to do it, right? And that becomes a question that it keeps me up at night, basically. Right? Like, if I don't fix, if I don't put, hash of bed in the C and CSO standards, if I don't fix this bug about Unicode in the C standard, if I don't fix this API problem in the C standard, is anyone else going to actually fix it? And the answer to that question is you can kind of see that the answer to the question is kind of no. In general, the answer to that question is if I don't fix it, or like not necessarily me personally, but like if somebody doesn't step forward and say I'm going to fix it, then it doesn't kind of get fixed. Right? And I can give an example. In C, in certain implementations, certain compilers, there's this wonderful thing called type of. where you give an expression or you give it a type, and it will basically return you back the type of that expression or thing. Um, Now, some people think this is new magic, but if you go back and you read the C99 rationale, you'll see that in the C99 rationale, they have this thing in there called type up, and they talk about why it wasn't yet ready for standardization. And so keep in mind, this is 1999, right? So in 2021, I sit down and I write a proposal for type up, right? And you can imagine, at first I think like, oh, well, I'm trying to fix a thing that people have been asking for. But then you figure out that this is something that people have been asking for 22 years. And you wonder, okay, if I didn't show up and write this paper, if I didn't show up to this committee, if I didn't do these things, would we have ever solved this problem? And that has kind of become a running theme for a lot of what I do. I show up into a place and I'm like, why haven't we solved this long-standing issue that everybody keeps complaining about? That other people also wanted a fix to. And the answer ends up being that nobody, I guess, put in that final effort, right? It's not that people don't want the problem solved, right? It's not that people don't complain about it. It's just that people haven't quite figured out all of the necessary steps to go from a complaint to a full fix. And that's not necessarily people's fault, right? Like, there's a lot of systems in place that kind of impede people from making that kind of progress. So when to basically to answer your question, it's not necessarily like a selfish, like, oh, I'm the hero and I'm gonna solve this stuff. It's like, if I don't do this, right, will there be another person who will be able to take on the same amount of burden and everything else and actually make things better for people? And for me, I mean, yeah, I could just pass the buck and wait for the next person, but why not me, right? It's weird. It's a bit weird, right? Anyway, it results in me doing a lot of things that are probably against my best interest as a human being, but now I ended up with these sheep ears, and this cafe ended up with so many sheep in it. But you have to try. You have to try, right?
There are worse life choices.
Yeah, there are definitely worse life choices, right?
Oh man, it's it's interesting you mentioned the whole idea of if I don't do it, who's going to? Because I think the way we've set up a lot of things in this industry is to really encourage complaining more than fixing. Like, the bug tracker's right there, and anybody can complain on the bug tracker. And the pathway for actually finding a good bug is usually pretty lousy, because you have to use an esoteric search tool that really is not reliable and guess which arbitrary keywords are going to give you the same bug. Otherwise, it's going to be closed as a duplicate and irritate everybody. And then you have the won't fix status. That is just an easy cop out where we can just defer this to the end of eternity. I hate won't fix. Please, and if I tell everybody, if you have any hand at a bug tracker at all, turn off won't fix. Change it to rejected. Change it to something else. Won't fix suggests, yeah, we know there's a problem. We don't care. Don't use that term. So there's all this barrier to even getting it reported at all, and then you have to get past the community wall of people debating about, like, well, is this even a problem? I mean, you're just a GUI library I was actually using telling me, and I'm not kidding, core developer actually said, and I quote, packaging on Linux is an edge case. It's like, I'm sorry, but if you claim full Linux support, oh, absolutely, it's we have premium support of Linux, but packaging the application is an edge case. Yes, you're a GUI library. What are they supposed to do? It's like, well, we usually do embedded hardware. It's like, no, bad, no.
Bad.
So, exactly. Language. Anyway. This is G-rated. Well, PG. Anyway, it's PG for pretty good. Anyway, so there's all these barriers to actually getting it actually addressed by people who can do something about it to begin with. But at the same time, I've seen so many communities put up all these walls to PRs because they go, well, don't put in a PR unless we've decided that we care about fixing it. And it's like, well, I understand that you don't want the additional code that you have to now deal with, but if this matters to somebody, it's going to matter to somebody else. What is it, Hiram's Law? That for a sufficiently large project, for every observable behavior in your project, there's somebody depending on it.
Yeah.
And we keep forgetting that. And that's now a very important thing in my life now that I'm, working with cloud images for a major distribution. And that's a very important thing because we can't just change something. I'm working for Canonical now. It's on my, on my website. It's really exciting, but we can't just change something in a cloud image on Ubuntu. We can't just arbitrarily get rid of one of those cloud images because somebody somewhere is depending on that image having this particular behavior. And this fix is going to break it for somebody. And so they need to be able to use the old version while other people can move forward to the new version. And that kind of, when you deal with the distribution, that brings Hiram's Law into focus, I think. So I'm sure C has the same phenomenon.
Oh, it definitely. Oh, God, even right now, one of the bugs. This is not the bug that made me go from C++ to C or to do both committees at the same time. Because again, I'm a masochist. I didn't just switch. I did do both. The bug that one of the new bugs that I'm working on in C right now is this idea that we can't actually change anything. Like literally, not one thing in the C standard can actually be fixed or changed. And this is it's based on these things called on the idea of application binary interfaces, right? So ABI, not API, which is application programming interface, but ABI. ABI is a little bit more hardcore in that it's not about the code that you compile or stuff like that. It's about the end result that ends up on somebody's machine and how it plays with everything else in the ecosystem. And so basically, because C is a compiled language, you basically take all of the assumptions and types and the constructs and mechanics and whatever else you have in the language, and you boil it all down to machine code, and then you ship that binary blob off to somebody, right? This is how I guess the majority. I mean, this is a very simplified view. That's how a lot of packaging works, right? That you don't compile the code; they compile the code for you, and then they ship you a binary, right? And then you depend on that binary, or that library, or something else in your distribution or whatever else. And so it makes it very hard because what it effectively does, it applies Hiram's Law to not just the observable behavior, but to every single binary quality that exists in your library. And so what ends up happening is that we have a bunch of things in the C standard that we would like to fix, that we would love to fix, but if we ever change them and any implementation silently upgrades that stuff, it will basically break the entire ecosystem that's using that specific thing. Because the binary code, the contracts around that binary code will change, right? So to use a little bit a little bit of a metaphor, right? Let's say you have a cat, and every day you feed that cat in this specific room in this specific bowl, right? So the cat gets used to the idea that every day at a certain time you're going to go put stuff in this bowl in this specific room, right? In say the dining room or whatever, right? And that's fine, right? Like the cat gets used to it. That's the way it is for 4 years. Then all of a sudden, you take the bowl and you put it in your bedroom, right? And that's where you feed the cat. And so the cat walks into the dining room and looks around for their bowl. They go to the same spot. They circle around a little bit. They meow a couple times, where's my bowl, right? And so that's effectively what the problem that we're facing in the C committee right now is, right? Is that we want to move the bowl, right? We still want to feed. It's not like we're not feeding the cat anymore. It's just that we want to change where we're feeding the cat, or maybe we've got a bigger bowl. Maybe this is a combination feeder, right? And it's hooked up to the water or something. So that's why it needs to be in the bedroom, close to the shared bedroom bathroom faucet or whatever the reason is, right? It's got a combination feeder. You get the food and the water at the same time, whatever. But we can't do that upgrade because the user, the cat, is depending. Has developed this memory that the thing will be in the dining room at the exact same spot, filled up every single day at the exact same time. So we as a standards committee can't move that bowl and put it somewhere else because some cat is going to depend on the fact that we've been doing it this way for 5 years. And because one of the weird things is that, again, as a committee or whatever else, we don't really have, like, in the cat situation, like, you're the owner, you can pick up your cat and, like, put them in your bedroom, be like, this is where the food is, like, learn where the food is and eat the new food, right? And they'll learn eventually, right? But as a committee, like, we're not your owner, right? Like, we don't break down the door and say, all right, we're changing things in here. Yeah, you're gonna eat over there now, and that's how it's gonna work. Like, we don't do that, right? So if
Thankfully.
when we change the ABI, right? When we change things and that affects the ABI, that affects this interface, this basically this contract between you and us that we've developed for 5 years, that this thing will always exist and you'll always be able to get it at the same place. It breaks the users, and it breaks them in not so nice ways. Like, so for example, for the cat can eventually, like, maybe they'll go outside and they'll kill a squirrel and they'll eat the squirrel. They'll bring you the dead squirrel and be like, look what I did, Dad. Didn't I do something great? And you're like, oh my God, why did you bring this to me? But there's workarounds, right? But for the application binary interface thing, there are no workarounds, right? Because again, not only can we not break down the door into your house and tell you to do things new, we also can't force you to, like, recompile your programs and things like that. So it becomes infinitely difficult for an old program to rely on a new library that has these new binary requirements or these new binary changes and expect it to keep working. And so this is a problem for the C committee. And so now I've written papers to tackle that. And so it's, yeah, I absolutely understand that, changing things and trying to fix things is painful and difficult, and sometimes, again, you just have to be the one person to make the changes there, to bridge the gap or figure something out that makes compatibility work or whatever else, because it's always painful.
Well, and I think it's worth noticing too that, wow, my train of thought just went bye-bye.
It's because all the sheep, because all the bleats, they start getting in your head a little bit.
Yeah, they do, rather. Yeah, no, it just shows that bugs can really originate even as far back as a design committee, and it's so, or even just in the design phase. That's why it's so important to get things right the first time. And we so easily say, well, no premature optimization, don't do premature scaling, whatever. It's like, no, you don't optimize now, you don't scale now, but you still think about what might I optimize, what might I scale, and at least leave room for yourself to do that. You have to think about this stuff with libraries and with programming languages, etc., because otherwise you wind up with I guess the horror story in this category would be JavaScript. Because JavaScript was done so quickly, such a short time frame, a lot of things weren't thought through, were not properly discussed, lots of hacks and workarounds, and unfortunately people became dependent on those hacks and workarounds, Hiram's Law, and so they can never change it now. Now JavaScript is stuck being terrible, and even though they can roll out a new way of doing it, they have to, also allow people to do the old thing. And this is, I think, the opposite of this is in Python. Everyone complains about, well, Python must be terrible because look how they broke everything going from Python 2 to Python 3. No, that was us trying to actually improve the language without violating Hiram's Law. And so right. Python 2 has all this code that has been written, it's legacy now, and if anyone's got any that they're sitting on, please rewrite it. But but then again, they had a very long time to do it. And Python 3 was shipped broken initially. People are like, well, that's proof of terrible design. No, we were shipping an early version while people were still dependent on Python 2. We're saying, you know what, if you need stability, if you want sanity, stay on Python 2, because Python 3 for the next few versions is just going to be a mess. And we're not going to pay attention to Hiram's Law. We're just going to break things and get it working, make it nice and smooth. Be ready to rewrite if you're using Python 3. It wasn't until Python 3.7 that we stabilized, because they were trying to overcome this whole concept of Hiram's Law without angering all the people sitting over on Python 2.
Right. It's debatable if it worked or not, because even in the C and C++ committees, we constantly we hear about, oh, did you know about the Python 2 to Python 3 and how bad did that go? We can't break anything in these committees. That's a bad idea. And it's like, oh boy. So yeah, it becomes a little rough to handle that kind of stuff and try to figure out the right way of dealing with it, I think. But Yeah, it's
But clearly it worked for Python to some degree because now it's ubiquitous in like what, 3 subspecialties? You
right.
know, it had a resurgence of usage. It's now arguably a candidate for one of the top 3 languages in the world.
Yeah,
Not that it was ever not popular, but it was starting to drop off at one point, and even before the switch. And Python 3.7, everyone was like, "Wow, this is a great language," and they rediscovered there's a renaissance of Python. So I think it ultimately paid off, but at the expense of inconveniencing people for about 8 years.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but it's always a bit rough, kind of uh, taking a gamble on doing things in a different way, or even asking for people to do things in a different way. Especially when there's a very long history of people kind of settling on things being one way. Um, people, whether it's companies or just people in general, they always get very uh, people get very scared when you wanted to when you want to challenge the way that things are done, or even do it in a different way, or try to provide better functionality or whatever else. And so everybody always gets uh, I don't want to say necessarily vicious, but they get very protective of what they have, and the systems that they've already set up. And so it's rough sometimes, but you know you have to do. Sometimes you just have to do what's good for the community and good for you, and what will be better for long term health, even if short term it's a little bit painful.
Yeah. Speaking of people getting irate, boy, that's not a terrifying setup.
Yeah, I don't know.
do, do,
My hand shaking the smoothie is like it's preferable.
yes. Oh man. So do you think that could potentially that dichotomy could that potentially be one of the reasons why C++ is so? I mean, I straddle the communities. I'm in C++, I'm in Python. And I will say that the Python community is historically very, very, very open, welcoming, inclusive, etc., and more so as time goes on. I mean, the inclusivity is incredible at any given conference. It's excellent, but that is not. And you pointed out a talk I saw you do called the Community Derp, and which was excellent. That is not the case with C and C++, and I could definitely agree. Is that part of the reason, though? Is the nature of the language reflecting the community there, or is it the other way around?
So I think that there's nothing inherently about the language that makes the community the way it is. Right? C and C is supposed to have a nature of attracting pedantic people, but that's because of the way the specification and the guarantees you're trying to make, right? On very low level guarantees, they're very tiny guarantees, right? Um, but that doesn't necessarily justify, I think, some of the vitriol and the toxicity that does exist in the community and the kinds of people that seem to talk about it. Even just yesterday, there was somebody. Right, I was talking about the differences between C and Rust, and about how in C there was, C doesn't really have tagged unions, right? Like people were saying, well, you can make tagged unions in C, right? You can create these structures that, based on a certain tag or a certain value, it changes what exactly is inside what is inside the union, the structure. And you can pick what you want, right? So you can store both an integer or a class or something else, right? All one by one, and then depending on what this little value says, you can say this is the integer, or this is the class, or this is, maybe a boolean or something else, right? Um, and I was making the point that C doesn't have this by default. And you kind of always have to build it yourself, and that's why C ends up being error prone, right? And just some of the weirdos that showed up in on that tweet, in that comment, just like the things that they would say, like the insults they would lob around, like they'd tell you, like, are you brain dead, are you mentally deficient, and stuff like that. And it's like, can you chill out a little bit? Or like we're talking about an actual deficiency in the language and how it's solved in Rust, and this person is already automatically off the rails. And so I don't think that the language itself actually requires that people are like this. It's just that's kind of the era that C and C is supposed to grow up in. So if you watch the video, my video of the community, it's it is you realize that the way that C and C ended up like this, and the reason why Python didn't, is because at the time that C and C++ and these languages were growing up, the purge of women, particularly, and other minorities in programming had already begun and had essentially already been completed. Um, Around the 50s and the 60s and into the 70s, basically marketing very specifically and deliberately targeted women in computer science, right? Because originally, computer science and computers and software in general was actually seen as women's work. It was literally women's work, and they excelled at it like really well. Again, the person who created the concept of a compiler and the modern compiler was Grace Hopper, right? His conference in her name, the Grace Hopper Conference. Um, Ada is, of course, the Ada language, but also Ada, the person who founded basically the field of computer science, right?
Of course, then you have Dorothy Vaughan, who made huge, leaps and bounds in terms of coding and coding literature, if I remember correctly. She was instrumental.
Right, and even for example, like Barbara Lipskov and other people who basically advanced computing, leaps and bounds, right? And a lot of people forget that these people, one, they forget that these people existed because they don't teach computing history all that well in many places, and two, by the time that these people were on the up and up, basically almost every other lady who wasn't basically astronomically influential to the field had been purged out of the industry. And that wasn't an accident. That was like an actual deliberate step that companies and marketeers and everything else were doing. Because at the time, they were pushing basically the idea that computers were for these for nerds, for lonely male nerds in their everything from their 15th, their 40s, and they were kind of this loner, introverted stereotype. And they were pushing that and selling that to basically sell computers for games and also for companies, right, for competing for companies. So the way that a lot of companies got other people to stop doing this is that they basically put out ads that said, "Oh, women were these devils that were scratching the tapes on your mainframes and other stuff like that." Right? This is literally what the ad said, and effectively they mounted a very successful campaign in pushing women out of computer science. So by the time C and C++ started, there were other programming languages around. Some of them even named after women, like Ada and everything else, but there were effectively no women participating, though I wouldn't say there were absolutely none. So, and again, this goes back to people not knowing the history. The reason one of the big accomplishments of C++ was the STL, right, the standard template library. Right, at the time it was standard template library, but then it got folded into the actual C++ standard library, and people kind of interchangeably used the name STL and standard library for C++. But the standard template library, as first envisioned by a man of the name Stepanov, there's, like I said, remember how I talked about the standards committee and there's always this process, right, that you have to put in a lot of work to go from the thing that you want to an actual thing in the standard, right? There's all these work and barriers you have to jump over, right? So Stepanov figured out, this is how the STL works. This is how generic programming. This is how you separate algorithms and data structures, and then like make the two play nicely together, right? That's been the foundation basically of so much other, even in Python, right? ITER tools, right? It comes from iteration, comes from iterators, and the idea of that Stepanov had spent a lot of time on. Rust has its own iterators, not exactly the same as C++, but very similar in the ideas, right? The idea that you can separate a data structure from its algorithm, and then you can run algorithms over these iterators or other data structures in kind of a generic fashion, right? So you can call sort on something, but not know exactly the exact shape of that something, right? But you can still sort it, you can still figure out how to partition it and other things like that. So Stepanov figured out a lot of this and a lot of his work in C++. And Stepanov did an interview, and he said something interesting. He said, if it was, I don't remember the exact quote, but I'm going to paraphrase a little bit, but he's basically like, if it was up to me, I would not have actually managed to finish the C++ standard template library. I wouldn't have been able to put it in the standard. I wouldn't have been able to push it all the way through. In fact, he says, like, he said that when I figure out a problem, and I know that it's possible, I get bored, right? Like, he's like, okay, in my head, I've figured out how to do this. I've verified at least that the properties hold. I'm done, right? Like, I'm not going to implement every single part of the library. I'm checking out. My brain is already off to the next problem, right? And so he specifically credited one person for basically being able to make sure that his work actually was sawn all the way to completion, and her name was Ming Li. And so Ming Li and another gentleman by the name of PJ Plagair are actually responsible for putting the actual STL as we know it in the standard library. Now, of course, everybody you talk to is like Stepanov, 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 right? You watch a presentation on CS Plus, they're talking about Stepanov, but most people don't know that you wouldn't have it wouldn't be available to you if Ming Lee didn't A, implement it, and B, make sure that it got through the standards committee with PJ Plogger. And so this is a lot of those things where people forget why exactly they have the utilities they do, right? And it's not even like an intentional erasure. It's kind of like a casual erasure of the fact that Ming Lee was in fact the one who really made programming, programming with the STL like a real thing on something that you could actually do with like your standard library distribution. Nowadays, of course, you have your own standard library distributions and everybody implements all the same stuff, but you got that because Ming Lee put hands to keyboard and did the stuff that Stepanov wouldn't do, did the implementation that Stepanov wouldn't do.
And we all know implementation is just as hard, at least as hard as design.
All right, exactly. And if it was not for Ming Lee, literally Stepanov says if it was not for Ming Lee, he says if it wasn't for Ming Lee, I don't even think we would have ever finished the project. We would have been done, right? Like I don't think he would have been delivered to completion if it wasn't for Ming Lee, right? And it was weird because I just found this like in an interview on some website related to Stepanov, and like it's weird that everybody says Stepanov, 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 right? But you almost never hear about Ming Lee. I had almost never heard of Ming Lee ever until that point, right? Which is weird, but it's kind of part of that part and parcel that it's not like there were no women in C++ or C at the time who were doing amazing work. It's just that very often they're forgotten or their names are erased and they're not really mentioned at the same time as the Stepanovs and the other and the Ritchies and the Kernigans and the Strustrups and other people who are given the same kind of clout at the same time.
Right, or they're just lumped in as part of a group like the Gang of Four, and we forget that there were women on the Gang of Four.
Right, exactly. And so there's a lot of kind of erasure that happens, and a lot of that erasure leads to this very kind of it leads to kind of this almost like James Damorian logic that they don't go from saying well there's no woman here, well that's just because they haven't had the chance or they weren't afforded the same opportunities as us. It was they're inferior, they're incapable of computing, they're incapable of doing computation or everything else, and that's why they're here. Not they've either been pushed out or they just have been afforded the same opportunities that we have, right? And so there's always a schism between what people believe is the truth about how people got here, and then and what actually is the truth about how women and other people ended up in. And it's frustrating. It's infinitely frustrating, right? And some people don't even have like a fully bad faith. It's just like they think that women must not be interested in computer science, right? It's like women aren't interested in Hot Wheels, and so that's why they're not interested. It's the same kind of thing, right? It's just not for ladies, right? But I don't think they understand not only the history, but the amount of women that just aren't afforded the same opportunity or even historically given the same importance as other individuals who have deeply impacted computer science, right? And it's not like it's hidden, right? Like Stepanov didn't like conduct some secret like thing to get rid of Ming Lee's name in all of these things, right? Stepanov, literally the person who credits Ming Lee the most is Stepanov in his interview where he's like, yeah, we wouldn't have shipped if it wasn't for Ming Lee. But people don't mention Ming Lee, their name barely comes up, that
erasure by prominence is like because 10,000 Google results are for Stepanov and one Google result on page 9 is for Ming Lee, then just everyone assumes it's and of course if it's this, like you mentioned in the talk, if it's like this for one minority group, if it's like this for women, then this is going to be the case for many other minority groups. If this phenomenon is going to happen with one, then it's going to be happening with others because you have a pattern of behavior.
It definitely does happen. So, for example, to go back to, this is a little bit of like a template. So, Richard Stallman, right, recently came back to the Free Software Foundation, right, and that was a big blow up, and everybody freaked out. But one of the weird things that happened while we were doing this is that people started saying that Richard Stallman was autistic, and B, people were mounting these attacks because they hated neurodivergent people, they hated autistic people, right? And that by calling out Richard Stallman's kind of like creepy and weird behavior, we were all saying that we didn't like autistic people or we didn't like neurodivergent people because we were pushing against pushing against some of the behaviors that clearly autistic people would have, right? So they were equating Richard Stallman's behavior with autism, right, and the behaviors that come with it, right, and other neurodivergent things. Um, and this is one of those cases where uh, it was weird because it wasn't even Richard Stallman who came out and said he was autistic. In fact, Richard Stallman has came out multiple times and said he's not autistic. Right? He said it in this Free Software Foundation book in interviews. He literally said, "I am not autistic." Right? He says, "Oh well, I might have like a shadow version of it." That's the wording he used. I have a shadow version of it.
He just has no social skills.
I have no social. Right?
He just has not taken the time to develop any.
Right. He says he doesn't have social skills and stuff like that, and so that's the way he kind of gets away with it. I think is maybe that's a little too strong of a word, but that's the way it called it. But basically, not only him, but then a bunch of other people outside of Stallman, right, start showing up and saying, "Well, we can't call out Stallman's bad behavior because that would just mean calling out autistic people's behavior," and so they create this very strange false equivalency between Stallman's jerk behavior in the community and autistic people, and they essentially use it to shield him from criticism.
Yeah, right? and I've seen this, and then the autistic people who actually are autistic come along and go, "Excuse us, we don't even do this.
Right.
This is not okay, and we are autistic." And then all the people who are not autistic are like, "Well, you're being really discriminatory against autistic people." It's like, we are. It's like, this is our group, okay?
Yeah, exactly. In fact, that's exactly what happened. There's Eric S. Raymond, Bruce Perens, all these people said, you can't, and it worked to a degree. It worked. 'Cause I had friends who like panicked, literally panicked, because they saw this treatment of Stallman, and because they read all these posts that said, "Oh, it's because they hate neurodivergent people. Oh, they hate autistic people," and I had friends who got scared and who were like, "I really wish that people wouldn't bash on autistic people." It's like, no, you're falling for a trap here. Like you are creating a false equivalency between Stallman being autistic, which he's literally said he's not, and his bad behavior, and these other things that are happening in the community, right? Like the two are not equivalent, right? Like by calling Stallman out, you are not calling out autistic people. You're not shaming neurodivergent people. That's literally a tactic that people like Bruce Perens and Eric S. Raymond are using to make an equivalency between these two and harm people, right? Like they're doing it because they want to shield Stallman from bad behavior, and in a way shield themselves from being accountable for their behavior, because they can just claim that, "Oh, I have a shadow version of autism," or, "Oh, I'm just not socially awkward, and that's why I do these creepy things like hand out pleasure cards or whatever else at conferences," right? But
yeah,
whatever,
or the classic, "Well, I'm just a really blunt person." Sometimes it can be a little too blunt. It's like, no, there's a difference between being blunt and being rude.
Right.
You can be a blunt person without being rude. I am a blunt person, and the only people who've ever complained about my being rude are the people who I call out for being rude to somebody else.
It's definitely like I definitely think that it's a real problem in the software community, right? That we will do any, rather than just calling out people's bad behavior and saying like, "Listen, this is not okay," right? And that's what a lot of my video was talking about. Like, just instead of just acknowledging the truth of the situation and just being honest about it and saying, "Yeah, we've got some work to do and we have some things to change," right? They will do anything but that, right? They'll do the Stallman thing where they say, "Oh, well, that's just, we don't want to discourage autistic people," right? Or, "Oh, we're not actually that bad with diversity. It's, in fact, we're actually more accepting than the rest of the world," right? And then you bring up the numbers and it's like, I don't know, those numbers don't look good for you, Chief. I think he's doing a little bit.
If you have to compare yourself to an other in order to look good, your behavior is bad.
Yes, exactly. And the worst part is, actually, so one of the people actually did make it. They made the comparison to physics, and it's like, that the physics community is really bad about this, right? Like, if you're going to compare yourself to numbers, like the stories about things that physicists do in their communities, and then the way it is,
yes,
it's
and
I think you probably get a little bit of that because, again, Python has a big connection with the science community, and so you probably get a little bit of that spillover. But it's like, I don't think that comparing yourself and saying you're better than the physics community is the win that you think it is, right? Like,
no.
Yeah, it's
No,
yeah.
well, yeah. So, well, yeah, yes, officer. I know I was going down the road at 95 miles an hour through a school zone, but hey, at least I wasn't. At least I was not robbing a bank. It's like, sorry, that defense is not going to work.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh dear. Well, hey, this has been really a great conversation. I think Boyan is over there just in.
Absolutely amazing. I enjoy every second of this conversation. So many new information, and as I haven't worked that much with C and C++, I learned tons. Also, a bunch of good history lessons.
Very.
Awesome. Yeah, nice.
It was great. So yeah, my coffee's run out here, so I'm probably gonna go up there and get a refill. But this was awesome. We should do this again sometime.
Yeah, definitely. Though can you totally ask them for like a refill? Because maybe I don't know if the horns are starting to grow out of my head, but I actually really like this hay smoothie.
Yeah, I can definitely grab one of those. Absolutely. Hey, do you want some alfalfa sprinkles? I heard they got alfalfa sprinkles now.
Oh my God! My brain said yes, but my body said no. It's happening. The next time you see me, I'm gonna be all puffy. Like I'll have a coat on, but it'll just underneath will just be a bunch of wool. Oh no!
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
How do you type with hooves?
It's a little bit of precision sometimes, and sometimes sometimes I bring up the on-screen keyboard because it has nice big buttons and I can just kind of tap, and that's how I make it work. But it's a challenge. I hope I can get back fingers at some point. But hooves are also kind of nice. I mean, being able to like scale a mountainside is pretty cool. But
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I mean you could use it to scale code too. So
exactly.
Oh, we're open 24/7. We're also online at bughunters.cafe and on Twitter, Dev, and Instagram as bughunterscafe. Yeah, the music is good, isn't it? It's provided by audionautics.com. We have a link on our website. Okay, so that's one rose latte, 3 Sprouts tip teas, and 2 Timothy Hay smoothies. Your total comes to 1 skin and 2 hanks of wool. Oh, exact change preferred.
Hey Martha, eventful day? Oh my, that's a lot of sheep.
We brushed up against the sheepers. You pretty well behaved though. Tips are interesting so far. I have received 3 salt licks and a sweater.
Well, that explains the alfalfa bales in the kitchen.
The unicorn is in bliss. Yes, I'll be right out with those smoothies.